Good evening and welcome to Growing Up Strong. I'm Tony May. This evening, a subject that has made headlines the past few months, domestic violence. It doesn't just happen in celebrity or sports figures' lives, it happens in lives right around your own neighborhood. We're going to discuss what's happening to solve the problem and create awareness right here in Palm Beach County. Joining me this evening is Brittany Gooten from Legal Aid Society. Nice to meet you.
Likewise, Tony. Thanks for having us.
And Marcia Guthrie, and you're a program officer with the Children's Services Council.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it is an honor to have both of you because both of you are doing so much to really raise awareness beyond the headlines about this important subject. So, Brittany, we're going to start with you and kind of start at the lifeline of when there is some kind of abuse or violence in a home and how it transitions to you all at Legal Aid.
Okay. So typically we get these calls a little bit down the step, and what we kind of advise people from the beginning is that really your personal safety is tantamount. So obviously we're referring people to contact law enforcement and also the local shelters beforehand. However, we kind of pick it up on the legal end, and what we're trying to do is help people get injunctions for protection against domestic violence, sexual violence, dating violence, and stalking at Legal Aid.
And one of the things I read in the statistics is it's not just women, which I found interesting. It's 1 in 4 women, but the statistics I saw said 1 in 7 men. And that's one of those stereotypes I'd like to break. There is violence in a myriad of relationships.
Absolutely. We see that in the very traditional family setting. So we're talking about spouses, also people who have boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, people who are parents to a mutual child but may be together at this point, may not be together. We see it in homosexual relationships, and we see them in other familial relationships. So we're talking about siblings, parent-child, all kinds of dynamics.
And Marcia, we're talking about a myriad of victims, as we said, but the youngest victims are really the children in the home. They may not have been physically hurt, but that's not really necessarily true about mentally.
Right, so we're talking about what's happening with children, not just children who witness violence. I think a lot of times when we think about domestic violence and we think about, well, the children, they're not seeing the violence in the home. They're not the one that's experiencing it because, as Brittany said, it may be happening between the intimate partners. But we know that the exposure of violence to young children has lifelong effects on how they develop, how they interact with their peers in school, how they focus on their education, and even until into adolescence. What kind of behaviors they take up as teenagers. Are they going to become risky? Are they going to try drugs? And are they going to be engaged in promiscuity as the young women? So we know that we need to pay attention not just to the adults in the home, but in particular the children and the effects that domestic violence has on them.
And I know Children's Services Council really focuses on that 0 to 3, and a lot of these victims are newborn to 3 in there, and that violence is happening around them.
Absolutely, Tony. I mean, here in Palm Beach County, we know that for particularly children 0 to 4, those children are been entering the dependency system in terms of the child welfare system at a astronomical rate in recent times. Those kids are 40% of the cases that we're talking about for children who have child abuse and have been victims of maltreatment fall within that 0 to 4, 0 to 5 age range.
Wow.
And that is a lot of children
That
here
is
in
a
our
lot
county,
of children.
in our community.
That is a lot of children. Well, both of you serve in the roles that we described, but you also serve on the Domestic Violence Council of Palm Beach County. Talk about that, Brittany, and why this crossover through many agencies is important when trying to really get rid of the problem of domestic violence.
Well, it allows us to really holistically serve our survivors. So obviously the legal end is important, and I think a lot of people focus a lot on the legal end, but really what people need is a lot of times a lot more practical. And so we are lucky that we have people and we have a myriad of services. So whether that's going to be things like shelter, educational support, psychiatric support, legal support, we're able to kind of get all of these organizations together and get them in one arena where they're all speaking with each other and kind of seeing where the flaws are or the deficiencies are in the system. So what we're missing when we're trying to help these people.
Wow. And Marcia, I know Children's Services Council was one of the supporters of a big kickoff for October. October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but we think the conversation needs an annual discussion. So in November, we're still talking about it. Why put together a big event? And it was literally standing room only. Is it just to get all the partners in the room, or is it for public awareness?
Absolutely, Tony. The council, both councils, and particularly when the Domestic Violence Council of Palm Beach County approached the CSC about applying for the professional fund to support this event, we said that this year we want to focus on education. We want to not just shine the light on domestic violence, we want to really look at this issue through the eyes of a child. And I think that was very much in keeping with the council's mission in terms of ensuring that our children are growing up healthy, safe, and strong. And in terms of the Domestic Violence Council, we said we want broad advocacy. We don't want this just to be an event where we have the usual suspects. We're talking to one another about this issue. We want to really open up the dialogue, have families included, have the broader community, have the non-traditional partners. We want to engage the faith-based community. We want this to be a conversation that's happening in all quarters in our community. And I think for the council, we recognize that a lot of people didn't know that services were out there. It was an issue with access. People didn't know where to turn to. They didn't know that we even have a Domestic Violence Council of Palm Beach County and what its mission and effort was. So I think we were very appreciative that the Children's Services Council was able to help support us in our broader mission to get out there. And we just are looking forward to next year's event, that it'll be bigger and better. But like you said, we don't want this conversation just happening in October. We want to be talking about this all throughout the year.
And the goal of making it a broader conversation really came true, because I was there. We're going to show a little bit of what happened that day that was just really impressive.
That as a community,
It was standing room only at the event kicking off Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. Law enforcement officers, support groups, shelters, victims of abuse were all there to end the silence surrounding the deadly problem.
Our office prosecutes about 3,000 domestic violence cases each year, and we have this year 7 domestic violence related homicides, and that's 7 too many. Our goal is to eliminate domestic violence in our community.
The Domestic Abuse Coalition organized the event. The idea? To bring together everyone with a united voice.
We have to stop it at the source, and we have to teach our kids you cannot act like this, and have them be able to resolve conflict in a way that doesn't involve violence.
Sheriff Bradshaw says working with schools and parents is crucial because children are besieged with violent images every day.
If you look in our society today, what's going on out there? The TV shows are violent. The video games are violent. You've got rock bands that glorify stalking and treating women disrespectfully. It's on the video. So, I mean, what's the message we're sending to the kids?
When there is violence in the home, it often goes unreported, according to experts.
We have found in our office that more than 50% of all domestic violence victims we work with refuse to cooperate. They don't want to go forward with it. And that is something that is enabling this problem to continue. Silence is the enemy, it remains the enemy, and our goal is to stop the silence.
Jenny Carter is stopping the silence. She lost her 8-year-old and 10-year-old at the hands of their own father. He then killed himself. She said it all started with verbal abuse.
A lot of times people think that abuse is only physical. It's not that. Mentally, it's the worst type of abuse because it stays with you when you get older, when you grow up.
Since her children were murdered, Jenny has become a brave advocate for domestic violence awareness. She works closely with women to convince them to get out.
There's a lot of help out there that some of them don't know, they know nothing about because they're embarrassed to talk about it. So I do give them that information to be able to make a difference and make the move. Even though they're not here physically with me, I will never get a hug or I love you, mommy anymore. But just to know that they're in heaven watching me and saying, Mommy, we're proud of you. You're making a difference so other children go through what we experienced. If I can make a difference in somebody's child so they won't go through what my children went through, that gives me the peace of mind to say, I'm making my children proud.
So, Brittany, you saw in that story a victim, you saw Dave Ehrenberg, you saw the sheriff. Is that what Marcia and you are really talking about here? It takes a village to help this problem?
It really does, and I think in large part because Palm Beach County is so diverse. And so we're talking about so many different cultures, so many different income levels, and so we want to have a variety of services that are available so people feel comfortable, because this is obviously a very embarrassing and very personal subject for most people. So a lot of times what works for one person really isn't going to work for someone else. So we want to make sure that we're being culturally sensitive and that people are feeling comfortable, because that's what's going to cause them to actually go and seek these services.
And culturally sensitive is a really interesting point. There is no stereotype to the victimization of this domestic
No.
violence, right, ladies?
No.
None. Because I think that's some of what you were touching on, Marcia, is people have in their heads, this only happens over there, in the poorer neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods with more tension. But really, we saw certainly from headlines the last few months, that's not true. But I want to bring it home. It's not true here in Palm Beach County either, right?
No, I think that oftentimes when people think about domestic violence, it's always the first step is to think about physical violence. We don't see the scars, but the scars that are happening to the victims that are experiencing this level of violence and this constant state. So, because domestic violence is about a pattern of behavior. It's not a one-time incident. And so oftentimes, well, I only did this one time. This only happened into my house this one time. So we're talking about patterns of behavior. We're talking about things that are happening over time and how those behaviors are really impacting all levels of the family. So I know in terms of the CSC and the kinds of programs that we fund, we want to ensure that those interventions are right up front. And so if you start to recognize that in my home, I'm having a problem, my spouse and I, we're not having good communication. We want to make sure that parents know where to go get support so that they can begin to address these things before they may be themselves engaged in an act of violence.
And when that's offered, do you see that when you get the word out there, people really are surprised and do all of a sudden say, well, that's exactly what I need? I know you were mentioning off camera, Brittany, that after the headlines with the sports figures and the celebrities, legal aid's phone started ringing off the hook.
Yeah, we definitely have seen, because in some ways, not to say that it's a good thing, because obviously it's never a good thing, but the media attention that has surrounded this issue lately has, I think, made people realize that there's not so much personal shame in this situation, that there's lots of other people who are affluent, popular people who seem to have, everything, who are experiencing this really horrible, traumatic, intimate event. And in some ways, it's caused us to be able to serve a much broader population.
In the last few minutes here, let's talk about successes, because I know in the event that I attended, there were some numbers, there's still huge numbers, there's still numbers that should not exist. But in truth, those numbers are going down in Palm Beach County. Is that right?
They are on the decline, but I don't feel comfortable saying that they're as low as we'd like them to be, because this is still a huge problem nationally, and it is certainly still a huge problem locally. So we really just want people to know that there are people here who can support them and who can help reduce that number.
And as you touched on, and we're about to talk a little bit more about it, Healthy Families,
Yes.
Children's Services Council program that really is, as you said, starting at the beginning, hopefully before you get, no offense to legal aid, for the help. You're seeing that this is really something that families are entering and seeing success.
Certainly. I mean, we have a range of services that are Healthy Families is a program that's directly targeting, working with families who have exposure to family violence and domestic violence. And the real effort is to reduce child maltreatment. So to help before we get to a case where we have child abuse in homes. We have the Nurse Family Partnership Program. We also have a new program that's come into our community, Child First. And that's really looking at what's going on in that family environment. What are those conditions? How are those parents interacting with those young children? And so we know that prevention and early intervention is really the key. And one of the most important factors in ensuring that children have an opportunity to grow up as strong as they can be in households is when that children are supported by parents or caregivers that have a loving and consistent pattern of working with them, that they are nurturing, that they're building those relationships. And so the council is supporting programs and efforts in our community that's aimed at doing those. And then once we have a family who unfortunately may have had some issue of domestic violence or some other episode of family violence in their home, we want to make sure that they get the right kinds of interventions, whether that's mental health counseling to help to deal with the aftermath, or a program like Triple P that's helping dealing with the behaviors for the children that may manifest after they've been exposed to violence.
And we should say all of this we're talking about, yes, it affects the families that we're discussing, the families that you touch, the families that you touch, but it affects this entire county because
Absolutely.
these are the same families that the children end up struggling in school, end up in jail. So with this early intervention, it breaks that cycle, thus less of a strain on all of our services. So when we talk about this, I really love that you're talking about everyone being affected in a positive way when interventions are in place and when these successes are, talked about and shared. So thank you both for what you do. We could go on all night, in my opinion, because it's something that's tangible and real in improving domestic violence and improving our county. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Tony.
And like we said, we'll have more positive stories right after this.
We're Children's Services Council of Palm Beach County. For almost 30 years, we've worked hard to make sure our children in Palm Beach County grow up healthy, safe, and strong. Today, we provide funding for more than 50 programs that help families every day raise our next generation. Our mission is to invest early in our children when it matters most, so our whole community thrives. Your Children's Services Council. Visit us online.
Well, we mentioned that there's a lot of good going on around the subject of domestic violence to help prevent and stop it. A lot of that good is going on at my next guest's organization. Welcome, Julie Swindler from Families First. Nice to see
Tony.
you.
Thanks for having me.
So we touched on it in the first segment, healthy families. That's somewhere where families that have had an incident of domestic violence kind of get into your system and get the help through that program. Is that true?
Yes, it is. We usually get the families from Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. They make a referral to us for our Healthy Families program, which is a child abuse prevention program. So those families that have domestic violence will qualify for our services. So we usually start when they're pregnant because the incidence of domestic violence is heightened when a woman is pregnant. So we get in there early to really help her so that she can develop a safety plan, understand what the harm is that's coming to her and her unborn child, and really develop a plan in place so that she can seek help and get out of there and get to domestic violence shelters.
Now, when you say create a plan, talk about what that looks like. I mean, you have counselors, you have, social workers. Who is involved in the plan?
We have a family support worker that really goes into the home to do the initial assessment. But we're fortunate because we have what is called a family specialist. And this is a person who is a licensed clinical social worker that is called in on these domestic violence situations where she can really truly do an assessment to see what level of risk that family is and what kinds of things we can develop for the family so that the family can get the help that she needs.
And that early intervention, as you said, have you seen that it's really, really working?
Yes, I have. And in fact, I can talk about two different families that we have had. We have one that she was smuggled here from Guatemala, and she was really with strangers, surviving with strangers, and she was physically abused and sexually abused. And this is her course for many, many years, was her existence. And then finally, she ended up having a child herself because she felt, she needed love, and that's what she thought the child would bring to her. And then Healthy Families was able to enter the program when she gave birth to the second child. And when we arrived into the program, we were able to really teach her a different way of parenting because all she knew was violence. And in fact, the partners that she chose were also violent to her. So we were able to really help her see the damage that was doing to her children. And she was able to remove herself from that situation. And now she has a partner who is extremely loyal to her, a good provider to her and her family. She's working herself now. The two boys are developing appropriately in school. And she has also recently adopted her stepchildren, or her stepsisters, because the father had passed away. So now she's raising 5 children
Wow.
and doing a remarkable job. But she understands what kind of risk she put her children at, and she was able to change her situation so that the children aren't raised in the same violent situation she was in.
So for someone like that, what does it take if people are watching, perhaps themselves, perhaps someone they know is in a bad situation, what does it take personally to end up on the other side like the young lady you just described? Because you have a lot of services that I'm sure work for most people, but maybe not all. So what is it different about this young lady? What kind of thing inside do you need to really, really overcome such a dramatic violent stage?
Well, what we find is a lot of the families we work with, they don't really understand how to protect their children. And sometimes they don't see the harm that is being done to the children. So it's really helping them understand and pointing out factors that are putting their child at risk, and them believing and seeing for themselves what kind of reaction their children are to certain situations that really impacts them. So sometimes we use video where, when they're working with a child or we're seeing the environment, they can see themselves the situation that is happening, because sometimes it's hard to hear it, so you have to visualize it as well.
Right.
And then pointing out certain things and helping them see that their choice of partner or their choice of language and how they respond to their child, and looking at the plugs and the electrical cords and some of the safety issues that they really overlook because they're so used to violence that they, the simple things that can put a child at risk, they just ignore. So it's really pointing it out and helping them see and understand so that they can make changes to better the life of themselves and their child.
And you talked about the incident is on the rise with pregnant women. Maybe people watching don't understand, even though the baby is unborn, the impact on that child even before they come out into the world. It's, that's some of what Children's Services Council I know is focused on before a baby's born, the real impact of things happening around the mom. Do women get that? Because it took me a while to really get that. So is part of the whole program really geared at teaching that as well?
Yes, it is. And I think what we know, too, about brain development, brain is like skin. It can heal and repair. So even internally, the mood, what you take in nutritionally, if you're depressed, it really hurts the baby, the nervous system of the baby. So we've learned that prenatally, that there's ways that we can help mom just talking to the baby, playing music. There's all sorts of things that can do to help the baby's development. And part of our job really is that healing and repairing and helping things to be different. So it starts prenatally in how we respond, how we act, the environment that we're in, what we eat, and just how we communicate. If there's argument going on, it impacts the fetus. And it's heightened because when you're pregnant, you're more vulnerable. So domestic violence
There's already
tends to be
enough
heightened.
going around with your pregnancy, let alone the domestic violence part.
Absolutely.
What you mentioned a story and you shared it with me, another amazing story to me about a young lady that's now actually part of the solution.
Yes, this was a young lady that we worked with for about 4 years through our Healthy Families program. She was raised in violence, and both domestic violence and child abuse as a child as well, and she was sexually abused for many years. And she ended up having a child because she wanted a child to love her. And as we all know, children come out, I want, I need.
Yeah.
They don't come
they're
out.
loving, but they're also needy.
Right. And so we entered the program with her, and the tape that played in her head all the time was, I'm a bad mother. Her mother used to say that all the time to her. So we were really able to help her see the good things that she was doing. And she had the desire to do better by her child so that she could break the cycle of that abuse. And so she was able to really begin to see how important the development was, how important language was, to talk to her young son and her daughter, to be able to really participate in play and engage that child so that she could see something different and how she was responding to them differently. And she graduated the program just this last spring and now is a family support worker with Families First. So now she is actually doing the work.
So she knows the story better than so many people of the person that she's helping.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because she's been there, she's done it, and
she's
she
pushed
knows,
through it.
she knows how you can change your choices that you make, your partners that you choose, and that impact the child and the children. And so now she's living proof that things can be different, and now she's part of the solution and working with us.
Well, you've certainly in these few minutes shown our viewers that things can be different. The services are there, and it's not a stereotypical problem, as we said in the earlier segment. You're helping all varieties of victims, right?
Yes, we are. And like you said previously, a victim can be anybody, any economic status, any race, any creed, any religion. So we're here to say that these services are here and these services are for you. And we're grateful to Children's Services Council that supports the Healthy Families Program, because for every $72,000 that it costs to put a child in the welfare system, it only costs us $1,800 to pay for that family. So we need to put the money on the front end, because otherwise we're going to be paying for it on the back end.
I could not have said it better, Julie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great advice. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we've given out a lot of information. We're going to put the websites where you can really get in touch with these organizations up. And until the next time, stay safe. Good night.